The morning alarm buzzed through the thin walls of Dormitory Block 7 on Galactic University Station Omega 7. Tom rolled over in his narrow bunk and checked the time display floating above his wrist device. Another day of being the only human among 50,000 alien students was about to begin. His roommate Pip was already awake, sitting on his bed and grooming his silver fur with quick nervous movements. The rabbit-like Velen had been assigned to room with Tom 6 months ago, when the Human Integration Program first started. At first, Pip had requested a room transfer 3 times, but the housing office kept denying his applications. Now they had settled into an awkward routine of polite coexistence. Tom stretched and got out of bed, trying not to move too quickly. He had learned that sudden movements made most alien species uncomfortable. Everything about humans seemed to trigger some kind of prey response in other students. His height, his forward-facing eyes, his teeth, even the way he walked apparently screamed predator to anyone who looked at him. The dormitory bathroom was shared between 20 students from different species. Tom had memorized the schedule too. Avoid peak hours when his presence would cause the most disruption. The Aquari students needed humid conditions and saltwater pools. The Giadi required mineral baths that would dissolve human skin. The Thornians absorbed nutrients through their root systems during long soaking sessions. Tom just needed 5 minutes with soap and water, but somehow he was always the problem dop as he walked to the bathroom. Whispers followed him down the hallway. Tom had picked up enough galactic common language to understand most of what they were saying. Deathworlder, predator species. Gravity adaptation syndrome, survival instinct overdevelopment. The terms had become familiar background noise. The academic building was a massive sphere connected to the dormitory ring by transport tubes. Tom preferred walking through the connecting bridges where he could see the stars. But the artificial gravity in those sections was calibrated for species that evolved on low-gravity worlds. His human weight made the metal flooring creak and bend in ways that terrified other students. Professor Quinn was setting up holographic displays when Tom entered the Advanced Ecosystem Studies classroom. The Thornian educator was nearly 3 meters tall with bark-like skin and leaves that changed color based on mood. Currently, those leaves were showing nervous yellow patterns, which Tom had learned meant the professor was uncomfortable. The other students filed in slowly, each choosing seats as far from Tom as possible. Nyx the Aquari sat in the front row, with her breathing apparatus humming softly. Bolt the Giadi picked a spot near the mineral dispensers where his crystalline body could absorb trace elements during lectures. Kira the Aryan perched on a floating seat designed for her wingspan. Tom sat in the back corner where his presence would be least disruptive. He pulled out his datapad and stylus, both specially designed for human hands. Most galactic technology was built for species with different finger configurations and hand sizes. The Human Integration Program had spent enormous resources adapting basic tools and furniture for their exchange students. Professor Quinn began the lecture with a discussion of biodome safety protocols. The topic was familiar to all students, except Tom, who was still learning basic concepts that other species considered elementary knowledge. Galactic civilization had been exploring and cataloging worlds for thousands of years. They had developed sophisticated systems for studying dangerous flora and fauna without putting researchers at risk. The safety protocols seemed excessive to Tom, but he had learned not to voice such opinions. When he had mentioned that some of the precautions reminded him of visiting a petting zoo back on Earth, the resulting silence had lasted for several uncomfortable minutes. Apparently, the concept of intentionally interacting with animals for recreation was incomprehensible to most galactic species. During the break between lectures, Tom overheard a conversation between Nyx and Bolt. They were discussing the upcoming field trip to Verdant 3, expressing excitement about seeing real specimens from dangerous worlds. Nyx mentioned that her family had taken special insurance policies before allowing her to participate in any program that included a human student. Bolt agreed that the risk assessment forms had been updated 3 times since Tom joined the class. Tom pretended not to hear while he reviewed his notes on xenobiology classification systems. Everything in galactic science was categorized by threat levels and risk factors. Species were classified as either prey, neutral, or predator, with extensive subcategories for specific behavioral patterns. Humans had broken the classification system by displaying characteristics from all three categories. Simultaneously, the afternoon lecture focused on predator identification and emergency response procedures. Professor Quinn displayed holographic images of various dangerous species while explaining proper evacuation protocols. The students practiced freeze responses, camouflage techniques, and distress signal procedures. Tom watched his classmates rehearse behaviors that seemed designed to make them more vulnerable rather than safer. When class ended, Tom gathered his materials and headed back to his dormitory. The corridors were crowded with students traveling between academic blocks and recreational facilities. Groups of friends walked together, speaking in their native languages and sharing meals from their homeworlds. Tom walked alone, as always. Pip was waiting in their room with a care package from his family. The Velen unpacked containers of crystallized fruits and nutrient pellets while chattering nervously about dormitory gossip. 3 more human students were scheduled to arrive next semester as part of program expansion. The housing office was reportedly struggling to find suitable roommate assignments. Tom helped Pip organize his care package items, noting how the Velen's hands shook slightly whenever their fingers accidentally touched. 6 months of living together had not reduced Pip's instinctive fear responses. If anything, prolonged exposure to human presence had made some of Tom's alien classmates more nervous rather than less. As evening approached, Tom sat at his desk and worked on assignments. For his xenobiology courses, the material was fascinating, offering insights into countless worlds and species that humans had never encountered. However, every textbook included warnings about deathworld species and survival-adapted organisms. Tom was studying his own species. From the outside perspective of prey animals, the space station's artificial night cycle began as Tom prepared for sleep. Outside his small porthole window, stars rotated slowly as the station maintained its orbital position. Somewhere among those stars was Earth, where humans lived normal lives without being classified as dangerous predators. Tom missed the simple interactions and casual friendships that were impossible in his current environment. Pip settled into his own bed with final grooming rituals and safety checks of the room's emergency systems. The Velen had installed additional locks and alert devices after moving in with Tom. Despite 6 months of peaceful coexistence, Pip still treated their shared living space as a potential survival situation. Tom turned off the lights and closed his eyes, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of careful movements and whispered conversations. The Human Integration Program was supposed to build bridges between species and foster interstellar cooperation. Instead, Tom felt like a walking reminder of why most galactic civilizations preferred to avoid deathworld species entirely. The transport shuttle hummed quietly as it approached Verdant 3, carrying 30 nervous students and one increasingly frustrated professor. Tom pressed his face against the porthole and watched the green world grow larger beneath them. After months of living on a sterile space station, the sight of actual forests and oceans made his chest tight with homesickness. Professor Quinn was reviewing safety protocols for the 5th time since departure, her bark-like skin displaying agitated orange patterns. The Thornian had clearly never supervised a field trip that included a human student, and the additional paperwork had required approval from university administrators, planetary authorities, and insurance companies across 3 star systems. Nix sat 2 rows ahead of Tom, her breathing apparatus working overtime in what appeared to be an anxiety response. The Aquarii had packed enough emergency supplies for a month-long survival expedition, even though they were only staying on Verdant 3 for 8 hours. Her family had sent detailed instructions about maintaining safe distances from the human student during all outdoor activities. Bolt occupied a reinforced seat designed to support his crystalline body structure. The Giadi was reviewing geological surveys of Verdant 3 and muttering calculations about mineral composition and tectonic stability. Like most of his species, Bolt treated any planet with active weather systems as inherently dangerous. The fact that Verdant 3 occasionally experienced light rainfall had required special protective equipment. Kira had folded her wings tightly against her body in the cramped shuttle seating. The airing came from a world with lower gravity and thinner atmosphere, making the dense air and heavy gravity of garden worlds physically uncomfortable. She wore a specialized harness that would prevent her from flying too high and encountering dangerous atmospheric conditions. The shuttle pilot announced their approach to Bio Research Station Alpha, the main facility on Verdant 3. Through the portholes, Tom could see a collection of white buildings surrounded by multiple layers of fencing and energy barriers. The safety measures looked like they were designed to contain something much more dangerous than educational specimens. Professor Quinn distributed personal safety devices to each student as they prepared for landing. Tom received a standard emergency beacon, environmental scanner, and what appeared to be some kind of medical injector. The other students got additional equipment including personal shields, camouflage generators, and emergency stasis pods. Apparently, human students were expected to either survive on their own or die quickly without requiring extensive rescue operations. The research station's greeting committee consisted of 6 faculty members from various species, all wearing protective gear that made them look like they were preparing for a biological warfare scenario. Dr. Webb, the station director, was a tall insectoid Krex who spoke through a voice translator that made his words sound like they were coming from inside a metal box. Dr. Webb led the group through multiple security checkpoints, each requiring biometric scans and contamination screening. Tom noticed that his readings consistently triggered additional verification procedures, while the other students passed through without incident. The security systems had been programmed to treat human biological signatures as potential threat sources. The main research facility contained dozens of biodomes, each designed to recreate specific environmental conditions from worlds across the galaxy. Professor Quinn explained that Verdant 3 served as a living laboratory where students could observe specimens in controlled habitats without the risks associated with visiting their native worlds. Their first stop was Biodome 3, which contained flora from temperate garden worlds similar to the homeworlds of most galactic species. Tom watched his classmates marvel at plants that looked remarkably similar to common Earth vegetation. Grass, trees, and flowering bush were apparently exotic and fascinating to species that evolved on worlds with crystalline formations. Fungal networks or aquatic plant life. Theodome 5 housed specimens from high-gravity worlds, though the artificial gravity inside was reduced to comfortable levels for the visiting students. Tom felt slightly lightheaded in the lower gravity environment, while his classmates moved with obvious relief. The plants inside were short and densely structured, adapted for heavy gravitational forces that would crush most galactic species. The group spent 2 hours touring various domes, observing creatures that ranged from tiny insect analogues to large herbivorous mammals. Tom found the specimens interesting but hardly exotic. Most of the animals displayed behavioral patterns and physical adaptations that he had seen in similar Earth species. His casual observations about animal behavior made the other students stare at him with mixtures of awe and terror. During the midday meal break, Tom sat alone at a table while the other students clustered together in nervous groups. He could hear fragments of their conversations about predator identification techniques and emergency evacuation procedures. Several students had contacted their families to report their safe arrival and request additional medical insurance coverage. Professor Quinn announced that their afternoon session would take place in Biodome 7, which contained specimens from worlds classified as mildly dangerous. The safety briefing took 20 minutes and included detailed instructions about maintaining minimum safe distances, avoiding sudden movements, and recognizing threat display behaviors in various species. The group entered Biodome 7 through an airlock system that sealed behind them with multiple redundant mechanisms. The interior was designed to mimic a forest environment with thick vegetation and varied terrain. Tom could hear animal calls echoing from different sections of the dome. Though he could not see the creatures that were making the sounds, Professor Quinn led them along a marked pathway to the first observation station, which featured multiple layers of transparent barriers and energy fields. Behind the containment systems, a group of small mammalian creatures foraged for food among the artificial undergrowth. The animals were roughly the size of earth rabbits but moved with quick, nervous energy that reminded Tom of prey species. The students spent 30 minutes observing the creatures while Professor Quinn explained their evolutionary adaptations and behavioral patterns. Tom noticed that the containment system seemed unnecessarily elaborate for animals that appeared harmless and skittish. The energy barriers and force fields would have been suitable for containing much larger and more aggressive specimens. Their next stop was the Predator observation deck, which featured additional security measures including armed guards and emergency lockdown systems. Professor Quinn explained that they would be observing a razor cat from Terminus 2, one of the most dangerous specimens in the facility. The creature was contained behind multiple force fields and energy barriers designed to prevent any possibility of escape. Tom looked through the observation windows and saw a large feline creature pacing inside its enclosure. The razor cat was roughly the size of an earth leopard with sleek black fur and prominent claws. It moved with fluid grace and obvious intelligence, occasionally looking directly at the observation windows as if aware of being watched. The other students pressed against the back wall of the observation deck, maintaining maximum distance from the contained predator. Several were visibly shaking, and Nix had activated her emergency breathing apparatus. Professor Quinn spoke in hushed tones about the creature's hunting techniques and kill rates on its native world. Tom studied the razor cat with professional interest, noting its body language and behavioral patterns. The creature appeared stressed and territorial rather than actively aggressive. Its pacing suggested anxiety about confinement rather than hunting behavior. Tom had seen similar responses in large cats at Earth's conservation facilities and recognized the signs of an intelligent animal dealing with artificial captivity. The safety systems monitoring the predator containment area displayed constant updates about energy field strength, environmental conditions, and creature behavior analysis. Everything appeared normal and secure as Professor Quinn continued her lecture about interspecies predator classification systems. The lights flickered once, then twice, before the main power grid crashed with a sound like breaking glass. Emergency lighting cast everything in pale red shadows as alarm systems began wailing throughout Biodome 7. Tom felt his stomach drop as he realized what was happening, but his classmates were already descending into panic. Professor Quinn rushed to the nearest control panel, her bark-like skin flashing bright red warning colors. Her leaves rustled frantically as she tried to access the backup systems, but the displays showed nothing but error messages and system failures. The power cascade had taken out primary containment, backup containment, and emergency protocols. Simultaneously, the razor cat's containment field shimmered and disappeared with a soft electronic whine. The large feline creature stood still for a moment, as if surprised by its sudden freedom, then stepped carefully out of its enclosure and into the main dome area. Tom could see its muscles tensing as it adapted to the larger space and analyzed the new situation. Nix made a sound like a drowning whale and collapsed against the back wall of the observation deck. Her breathing apparatus was cycling rapidly, but she seemed unable to get enough oxygen into her system. The Aquari's natural response to predator presence was to dive deep underwater and hide, but there was no water available except the small emergency pools designed for cleanup procedures. Bolt tried to activate his personal shield generator, but the device sparked and went dead in his crystalline hands. The Giadi began making high-pitched clicking sounds that Tom had learned indicated extreme distress. Bolt's species had evolved on a world with no natural predators, and their response to dangerous situations was to become completely motionless and hope that threats would lose interest. Kira attempted to take flight but immediately crashed into the dome ceiling, which was too low to accommodate her wingspan. The Erin's wings were designed for soaring in open skies, not maneuvering in enclosed spaces. She fell heavily to the floor and lay. They're making wounded chirping sounds while one wing bent at an unnatural angle. The emergency exit was sealed, behind multiple security barriers that required manual override procedures to open. Professor Quinn was frantically trying to remember the proper codes while her students scattered in different directions around the observation area. The Razor Cat watched these movements with growing interest, its predatory instincts engaging as it observed the chaotic flight responses. Tom counted 30 students plus Professor Quinn, all displaying various forms of prey animal behavior that would make them more attractive targets rather than less. Several had fainted outright and were lying motionless on the floor. Others were running in circles or trying to hide behind furniture. A few were making high-pitched distress calls that would alert any predator to their exact locations. The Razor Cat began moving toward the observation deck with fluid, purposeful steps. Its body language indicated curiosity rather than immediate aggression, but Tom could see that the situation was rapidly changing. The creature was becoming more confident as it realized that the strange beings making all the noise were potential prey rather than threats. Pip had wedged himself into a corner and was trembling so violently that his silver fur was standing straight up. The Velen was making soft whimpering sounds while his large eyes remained fixed on the approaching predator. Tom realized that his roommate was experiencing complete system shutdown from terror and would be unable to move or respond to directions. Professor Quinn finally got the emergency communication system working and began broadcasting distress signals to the research station's security force. However, the automated response informed her that the power failure had affected multiple biodomes simultaneously, and rescue teams were dealing with containment breaches throughout the facility. Estimated response time was 45 minutes. The Razor Cat was now less than 20 meters away from the observation deck and closing the distance steadily. Tom could see that several of his classmates were trapped between the creature and the sealed emergency exit. The manual override controls were located near the exit door, but reaching them would require someone to move directly into the predator's path. Tom noticed that the emergency lighting was powered by a separate backup system that seemed to be functioning normally. The environmental controls were also operational, maintaining proper atmosphere and temperature throughout the dome. Only the containment systems and primary security measures had failed, which suggested a targeted system failure rather than general power loss. The Razor Cat paused about 15 meters from the observation deck and sat down in a relaxed position. Tom realized that the creature was not actually hunting or preparing to attack. Instead, it appeared to be studying the strange beings that had been watching it for so long. The predator was curious about its observers and seemed content to wait and see what they would do next. However, the continued panic and distress calls from the students were clearly affecting the creature's mood. Its ears were flattening against its head, and its tail was beginning to twitch in patterns that Tom recognized as signs of growing agitation. The Razor Cat was becoming stressed by the chaos and noise, which could trigger defensive or aggressive responses. Professor Quinn was still trying to establish communication with the security teams while simultaneously attempting to calm her students. The Thornian was speaking in multiple languages, trying to reach each species in their native tongue, but her own distress was making her words difficult to understand. Her bark-like skin was cycling through rapid color changes that indicated severe anxiety. Tom looked around the observation deck and realized that he was the only person present who was not displaying obvious prey behaviors. While everyone else was panicking, hiding, or collapsing, he was standing calmly and assessing the situation logically. The Razor Cat had apparently noticed this difference and was now looking directly at him with obvious interest. The emergency communication system crackled with updates from the security teams. Multiple biodomes were experiencing containment failures, and several research teams were trapped in different locations throughout the facility. The security force was prioritizing rescues based on threat levels and available resources. Biodome 7 was classified as a medium priority situation, since it contained only one escaped specimen. Tom realized that waiting for rescue was not a viable option. His classmates were becoming increasingly panicked, which was making the Razor Cat more agitated. Several students were showing signs of severe physiological distress that could become life-threatening without immediate medical attention. The situation was deteriorating rapidly and would likely result in serious injuries or deaths. If someone did not take action soon, the Razor Cat stood up and took several steps closer to the observation deck. Tom could see that the creature was now within striking distance of the students who had collapsed near the front of the platform. The predator's body language was shifting from curiosity to active interest in the potential prey items that were displaying such attractive vulnerability signals. Tom made his decision and stepped forward toward the edge of the observation deck. The movement caused several of his classmates to make additional distress sounds, but he ignored them and focused on the Razor Cat. The creature's attention immediately shifted to him as the only being present who was moving with purpose rather than panic. Tom stepped down from the observation deck and walked slowly toward the Razor Cat, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Behind him, he could hear Professor Quinn making desperate sounds in her native language while several students began hyperventilating at the sight of their human classmate approaching certain death. The Razor Cat tilted its head slightly and watched Tom approach with obvious confusion. The creature had expected the strange bipedal being to display the same panic responses as all the others, but instead this one was moving with calm confidence directly toward a predator. The cat's tail stopped twitching as it tried to process this unexpected behavior. Tom kept his eyes focused slightly to the side of the Razor Cat's face, avoiding direct eye contact that might be interpreted as a challenge. He had learned this technique from working with large cats at Earth's wildlife preserves, where direct stares could trigger aggressive responses. The universal body language of non-aggression seemed to work across species barriers. He moved slowly and kept his hands visible, palm down and slightly extended to show he was not carrying weapons or food. Tom's breathing remained steady and controlled, unlike the rapid panting and distress calls coming from behind him. The Razor Cat's ears pricked forward as it noticed the difference in his physiological responses compared to the obvious prey. Animals. Professor Quinn was frantically trying to contact Tom through the emergency communication system, but he had muted his personal device to avoid sudden noises that might startle the predator. The Thornian was speaking rapidly about proper predator encounter protocols and emergency evacuation procedures, but Tom was relying on instincts and experience that no galactic university could teach. The Razor Cat took a tentative step toward Tom, its body language shifting from predatory interest to genuine curiosity. The creature was clearly intelligent and was trying to understand why this being was not afraid. Tom continued his slow approach, speaking in low, gentle tones that he hoped would sound calming rather than threatening. Tom extended his hand toward the Razor Cat, moving inch by inch to give the creature time to process his intentions. The predator sniffed carefully at his fingers, its sensitive nose analyzing scents and pheromones that were completely different from any prey species it had encountered. Tom's chemical signature apparently contained none of the fear markers that would trigger hunting instincts. The Razor Cat allowed Tom to touch its head briefly before stepping back to maintain a comfortable distance. The gesture was clearly meant as a peace offering rather than submission, and the intelligent predator seemed to understand the difference. Tom could see recognition in the creature's eyes as it realized he was communicating rather than surrendering. Behind them, Pip had started making soft keening sounds that indicated his nervous system was approaching complete shutdown. Tom glanced back and saw that several other students were also showing signs of severe physiological distress. Nix appeared to be having breathing difficulties, while Bolt had become completely motionless and was no longer responding to external stimuli. Tom began moving slowly toward the emergency exit, using hand signals and body language to encourage the Razor Cat to follow him. The creature seemed to understand that he was trying to guide rather than flee, and it padded along beside him with cautious cooperation. The predator was clearly enjoying this unusual interaction with a being that treated it as an intelligent individual rather than a dangerous threat. The emergency exit controls were located behind a protective panel that required manual activation in case of power failure. Tom had studied the safety systems during their earlier tour and remembered the basic override procedures. However, the controls were designed for species with different hand configurations, and he needed to adapt the sequences for human physiology. Tom worked carefully with the manual controls while the Razorcat watched with obvious interest. The creature seemed fascinated by his problem-solving abilities and technical knowledge. It occasionally made soft rumbling sounds that Tom interpreted as either approval or encouragement, though he realized he might be projecting human emotional responses onto alien behaviors. The emergency exit began cycling through its unlocking sequence with mechanical grinding sounds that indicated the manual systems were functioning properly. Tom continued speaking to the Razorcat in calm, reassuring tones while he completed the override procedures. The Predator remained relaxed and cooperative throughout the process. Professor Quinn had managed to organize the conscious students into a group near the back of the observation deck, though several were still displaying panic responses that made movement difficult. The Thornian was trying to prepare them for evacuation while simultaneously monitoring Tom's interactions with the escaped Predator. Her bark-like skin continued cycling through colors that indicated extreme stress and confusion. The emergency exit opened with a soft hiss of equalizing air pressure. Tom gestured toward the opening while speaking to his classmates in multiple galactic languages, encouraging them to move toward safety. However, most of the students were too terrified to leave the relative security of the observation area while the Razorcat was still free in the dome. Tom realized he would need to remove the Predator from the immediate area before his classmates would be willing to evacuate. He began walking slowly toward the creature's original enclosure, using the same calm body language and gentle vocalizations that had established their peaceful interaction. The Razorcat followed him willingly, apparently enjoying the companionship. The containment area had been designed for the creature's comfort and included features that mimicked its natural habitat. Tom could see food dispensers, water sources, and resting areas that were obviously familiar to the Razorcat. The Predator moved toward these amenities with clear recognition and satisfaction, suggesting it was ready to return to the security of its established territory. Tom guided the Razorcat back into its enclosure area, using patient encouragement rather than force or intimidation. The creature entered voluntarily and immediately went to its favorite resting spot, a raised platform that provided a good view of the surrounding area. It settled down comfortably and began grooming itself, apparently satisfied with the unusual adventure. The manual containment systems were still functional even though the automated barriers had failed. Tom activated the mechanical locks and physical barriers that would keep the Razorcat secure until the main power systems could be restored. The creature watched him work but showed no signs of wanting to escape again. Apparently content to remain in familiar surroundings, Tom walked back toward the emergency exit where his classmates were finally beginning to move toward safety. Professor Quinn was helping the injured and unconscious students while coordinating with security teams through the communication system. The evacuation was proceeding slowly but successfully as students overcame their terror and began moving toward the exit. The entire incident had lasted 12 minutes from the initial power failure to the successful containment of the escaped Predator. Tom felt slightly tired from the stress and concentration required, but otherwise normal. He had handled similar situations during his childhood on Earth, where encounters with wildlife were common and potentially dangerous. However, as Tom looked at his classmates, he realized that his response to the crisis had been anything but normal from their perspective. The other students were staring at him with expressions that mixed awe, terror, and complete incomprehension. Professor Quinn appeared to be in shock as she tried to process what she had witnessed. Tom helped carry the unconscious students toward the emergency exit while the Razorcat watched from its enclosure with what appeared to be mild interest. The crisis was over and everyone was safe, but Tom could already sense that the real consequences of his actions were just beginning. The security footage from Biodome 7 reached galactic news networks before Tom had even returned to his dormitory. Someone in the research station's communication department had leaked the recordings, and within hours the incident was being broadcast. Across thousands of worlds throughout known space, Tom sat on his narrow bunk and watched himself on the holographic display, seeing the events from external camera angles for the first time. The footage showed him walking calmly toward a predator that had sent 30 other students into complete panic, establishing peaceful contact and then casually guiding the creature back to its enclosure as if he were helping a lost pet find. Its way home. The news commentary was being translated into hundreds of languages, but the tone was universally the same across all species. Shock, disbelief, and barely concealed terror at the implications of what they had witnessed. Military analysts were studying frame-by-frame breakdowns of Tom's body language and movement patterns. Xenobiologists were demanding explanations for behavior that violated every known principle of prey species. Survival instincts. Pip had not spoken since their return to the dormitory. The Velen sat on his bed and stared at Tom with huge eyes that seemed to be seeing him for the first time. Occasionally, Pip would start to say something, then stop and retreat into nervous grooming behaviors that made his silver fur stand up in random directions. Tom's personal communication device had been buzzing constantly with incoming messages from across the galaxy. Military recruiters were offering immediate commissions with ranks and salaries that seemed excessive for someone with no formal training. Research institutions wanted to study his psychological and physiological responses to stress situations. Adventure tourism companies were proposing endorsement deals for expeditions to dangerous worlds. The Galactic Council had announced emergency sessions to discuss the implications of human integration into interstellar society. Representatives from hundreds of species were demanding risk assessments and safety protocols for any future interactions with Deathworld inhabitants. Several worlds had already implemented travel restrictions for human visitors pending further study of their behavioral patterns. Professor Quinn appeared on the news feeds looking exhausted and overwhelmed as she tried to explain the incident to various interview programs. The Thornian kept emphasizing that Tom had violated every established safety protocol while simultaneously admitting that his actions had probably saved multiple lives. Her bark-like skin displayed confused color patterns that indicated she was struggling to reconcile her training with observed reality. Tom turned off the news feed and tried to focus on his homework assignments, but concentration was impossible with the constant stream of communication requests. His xenobiology professor had postponed all classes pending a comprehensive review of human student safety policies. The Advanced Ecosystem Studies program was suspended indefinitely while university administrators tried to determine appropriate risk management procedures. A soft knock at the dormitory room door interrupted Tom's thoughts. He opened it to find Dr. Webb, the research station director, along with 2 university security officers, and what appeared to be a recording crew from the Galactic Education Network. The insectoid Krex looked even more uncomfortable than usual. As he explained that they needed to conduct formal interviews about the incident, Tom answered their questions as simply and honestly as possible, but his explanations seemed to make the interviewers more confused rather than less. When he described his childhood experiences with Earth wildlife, several species representatives requested immediate medical evaluations to determine if he was suffering from psychological trauma or memory disorders. The concept of growing up around dangerous animals was apparently incomprehensible to most galactic civilizations. Tom's casual mentions of camping in areas with bears, swimming in lakes with predatory fish, and hiking through territories inhabited by venomous snakes caused visible distress reactions among the interview crew. Several had to excuse themselves to contact their families and confirm their own safety. Dr. Webb asked for detailed explanations of Tom's animal handling techniques and decision-making process during the crisis. When Tom tried to describe basic concepts like reading body language, avoiding threatening gestures, and establishing nonverbal communication, the translation software struggled to find equivalent concepts in most galactic languages. The interview session lasted 3 hours and covered topics ranging from human evolutionary history to Earth's classification as an extreme survival environment. Tom found himself defending decisions that had seemed obvious and natural at the time. The idea that approaching a stressed predator with calm confidence was somehow extraordinary rather than common sense appeared to be beyond the comprehension of his questioners. After the interview crew departed, Tom received a priority communication from his parents on Earth. His mother and father appeared on the holographic display looking slightly puzzled but not particularly concerned about their son's sudden galactic fame. They had seen the news reports but seemed more interested in whether he was eating properly and keeping up with his studies. Tom tried to explain the significance of what had happened and the reactions it was generating throughout galactic society. His parents listened politely but clearly did not understand why basic animal handling skills were being treated as miraculous abilities. His father mentioned that their neighbor's dog had gotten loose last week and asked if Tom was learning anything useful in his expensive alien university. The communication ended with his mother reminding him to wear appropriate clothing for different planetary climates and his father asking about his grades in advanced mathematics. Tom realized that from Earth's perspective, his actions were completely unremarkable. He had encountered a large predator, assessed the situation, and resolved the problem using techniques that any reasonably competent person should know. Over the following days, Tom's daily routine became increasingly difficult as other students struggled to process their changed perception of human capabilities. Classmates who had previously avoided him now stared with mixtures of worship and terror. Some requested autographs or personal protection services. Others petitioned the university administration to remove all human students from programs involving any potential dangers. The Advanced Ecosystem Studies program was restructured to include mandatory human supervision for all field activities involving species classified above threat level 3. Tom found himself appointed as an unofficial safety consultant despite having no formal qualifications beyond being born on a deathworld. His opinions about relatively harmless creatures were now treated as expert assessments by faculty members with decades of professional experience. Pip gradually began speaking to Tom again, but their conversations were stilted and formal compared to their previous casual interactions. The Velen asked careful questions about Earth animals and survival techniques, treating Tom's childhood experiences as legendary adventures rather than normal growing-up stories. The dormitory atmosphere had changed completely. Students from other rooms would peek around doorways to catch glimpses of Tom as he walked through the corridors. Some left small gifts outside his door, offerings of food or trinkets from their homeworlds. Others posted additional security measures on their own rooms and requested room transfers to different floors. Tom's academic schedule was disrupted by constant requests for consultations and demonstrations. The university's Department of Interspecies Relations wanted him to develop training programs for emergency response situations. The Military Science Division offered research positions studying human tactical advantages in hostile environments. The medical college requested biological samples to analyze human stress response mechanisms. 3 weeks after the incident, Tom received an official communication from the Galactic Council's Committee on Deathworld Species Integration. The message informed him that his actions had prompted a complete review of human classification status and integration policies. Several council members were requesting formal hearings to determine whether humans should be reclassified as a beneficial rather than dangerous species. The political implications were staggering. Entire defense budgets had been allocated based on the assumption that deathworld species posed existential threats to galactic civilization. Trade agreements included specific exclusions for products from high-gravity survival worlds. Immigration policies had been structured to prevent deathworld inhabitants from settling in civilized systems. Tom's simple act of helping a stressed animal had accidentally undermined thousands of years of galactic political and social structures. Military strategists were reassessing their understanding of human capabilities. Diplomatic corps were developing new protocols for interacting with species that possessed incomprehensible survival skills. Economic analysts were calculating the potential benefits of human integration into various industries. The media attention continued to grow rather than diminish as more species learned about the incident. News programs featured expert panels discussing the implications of human behavioral patterns. Scientists debated whether Tom's actions represented typical human capabilities or exceptional individual traits. Religious leaders incorporated the event into sermons about the mysterious nature of creation and the diversity of intelligent life. Tom found himself unwillingly famous across hundreds of worlds, representing his entire species in a role he had never requested or prepared for. Children from dozens of species were drawing pictures of the brave human who made friends with monsters. Adults were using his name as a synonym for impossible courage and inexplicable competence in dangerous situations. The Human Integration Program announced a massive expansion in response to galactic demand for human students and advisors. Universities throughout known space were requesting human exchange students for their survival studies programs. Military academies wanted human instructors for their hazardous environment training courses. Research institutions were offering unprecedented funding for human-led expeditions to previously unexplored dangerous worlds. Tom's parents called again to check on his progress and mentioned that several alien diplomats had visited Earth to discuss expanded cultural exchange programs. His mother was pleased that he was making such a good impression on his classmates, though she warned him not to let the attention go to his head. His father asked if the aliens might be interested in purchasing Earth's agricultural products or manufacturing technologies. As the semester continued, Tom settled into his new role as the galaxy's most reluctant celebrity and unofficial human ambassador. He helped redesign safety protocols that actually improved protection for all species rather than simply assuming the worst-case scenarios. He consulted on habitat designs that better accommodated the psychological needs of captured predators. He demonstrated basic survival techniques that could save lives in emergency situations. However, the most significant change was in how other students interacted with him on a personal level. The fear and avoidance had been replaced by curiosity and respect, but also by expectations that were impossible to meet. Tom was still just a university student trying to complete his xenobiology degree, but he was now expected to be an expert on everything from military tactics to interspecies psychology. The final irony was that Tom's greatest achievement in the eyes of galactic civilization was something that had required no special training, no advanced technology, and no superhuman abilities. He had simply applied basic common sense and elementary animal handling skills to a situation that everyone else had overcomplicated through excessive fear and inadequate preparation. As Tom prepared for sleep in his dormitory room, he reflected on how a simple field trip had accidentally transformed him into a symbol of human potential and capability. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities as the galaxy continued to adjust its understanding of what humans could contribute to interstellar society. He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the millions of beings across hundreds of worlds, who now expected him to solve problems that their own civilizations had never learned to address. Outside his window, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the political and social upheavals caused by one human student who had treated a frightened animal with basic kindness and competence.